Hey everyone! Today we're diving into one of the most dramatic and game-changing moments in history, the Mongol invasion of Europe. Imagine a force that seemed to come out of nowhere, sweeping across the landscape like a storm, conquering city after city. That's exactly what happened in the early 13th century. The Mongols first showed up in Russia and Eastern Europe in 1223, but that was just a taste of what was to come. By 1237, they launched a full-scale invasion that lasted until 1242. They moved with such speed and ferocity that people started calling them the Horsemen of the Devil. They reached as far west as Wrocław in Poland, leaving a path of destruction in their wake. Cities like Tbilisi, Kiev, and Vladimir fell to their might. The Mongols even reached the Danube River, devastating Hungarian cities like Buda, Pest, and Gran. It wasn't just their numbers that made them unstoppable. Their tactics were unlike anything Europe had ever seen. The Mongols used fast-moving cavalry, terrifying siege weapons like incendiary catapults, and psychological warfare to break the spirit of their enemies. The Russians and other European powers just couldn't get their act together to put up a solid defense against these relentless attacks. Now you might be wondering what stopped them. It wasn't some heroic last stand. It was the death of Genghis Khan, the Mongol leader at the time, in 1241. This unexpected event forced the Mongols to retreat, giving Eastern and Central Europe a much-needed break from the onslaught. But here's a twist. Even with all the destruction, there was a silver lining. This invasion brought the East and West into closer contact. For the first time, Western travelers ventured into East Asia, a region they once thought was filled with mythical creatures. And guess what? The Chinese thought the same about Europe. So, while the world became a bit more violent, it also became a bit smaller and more connected. Genghis Khan, who took over from his father, Genghis Khan, in 1229, had a lot on his plate. The Mongol Empire was vast, but it was also broke and lacked a proper government system. Genghis knew he had to create a functioning state to collect taxes and keep the empire's economy going. So, he set up a new capital at Karakorum in 1235 and established a proper state apparatus. Once he had that sorted out, he could focus on expanding the empire even further. China was always the ultimate prize for the Mongols. At that time, China was divided into the Jin state in the north and the Song dynasty in the south. By 1103, Genghis had defeated the Jin state, but he decided to leave the Song for another time. Instead, he turned his attention westward, setting the stage for one of the most significant invasions Europe had ever seen. And now let's dive deeper into the Mongol conquest of the West. After their initial victories, the Mongols weren't done. They set their sights on the Russian principalities. Genghis Khan's armies had already swept across Western Asia, circled around the Caspian Sea, and even defeated a Russian force at the Battle of Khalkha in 1223. But despite these early victories, many of the defeated regions weren't eager to pay the tribute demanded by the Mongol Khan. Genghis Khan, Genghis Khan's successor, wasn't the type to let that slide. He sent a powerful army to enforce Mongol authority and ensure these regions knew who was in charge. The Khwarezm Empire, in particular, felt the full force of Genghis' wrath throughout the 1230s. By 1235, the Mongols had invaded northern Iraq. One victory led to another, and soon they pushed into Azerbaijan, Georgia, and Armenia. By 1338, relentlessly wearing down the fortified cities and collecting tribute from local rulers. They were on a mission, and nothing was going to stand in their way. In a multi-pronged assault that spanned continents, the Mongols moved through Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan, defeating the Bashkirs and Bulgars. By winter 1237, they turned their focus on the Russian principalities across the Volga River. Surprisingly, the harsh Russian winter didn't slow them down. In fact, they thrived in it. The Mongols and their sturdy horses were used to the tough conditions of the grassland steppe, so the frozen rivers and plains of Russia were no match for them. The city of Ryazan was the first to face the Mongols' wrath. From December 16th to 21 in 1237, it was besieged and brutally destroyed. According to the Voskresensk Chronicle, the Mongols burned the city, killed the prince and his family, and massacred countless men, women, and children. It was a horrific scene, with many people slaughtered by swords or arrows, while others were thrown into flames or mutilated in unspeakable ways. This brutal fate wasn't unique to Ryazan. The Mongols repeated this merciless destruction across many other cities. The Russian princes, bogged down by their own rivalries and conflicts, failed to unite against the Mongol threat even in this dire moment. Next, the Mongols turned to Moscow, which was not yet the significant city it would later become. Then came Suzdal in 1238, and finally, Vladimir, the fortified capital, was besieged. Grand Duke Yuri abandoned his city, leaving his family behind to face the Mongols. He tried to regroup and launch a counterattack but arrived too late. Vladimir had already fallen on February 7th, its cathedral burned to the ground. Yuri's forces were defeated, and he was killed at the Battle of the Sit River. The Mongol rampage continued. Torshak, a city that put up a fierce resistance, eventually fell on March 23, 1238. As spring arrived, the Mongols, perhaps temporarily satisfied, turned back towards the north of the Black Sea, sparing Novgorod from attack. But this retreat was only temporary. By 1239, the Mongols launched a third wave into Ukraine, defeating the Polovchins and capturing Kiev after a brief siege on December 6, 1240. Kiev, once a vibrant and populous city, was reduced to rubble. An envoy of the Pope, Giovanni da Piano Carpini, who traveled through the region 6 years later, described the haunting sight of countless skulls and bones scattered across the ground. The devastation was total. A once great city was now a wasteland. From Kiev, the Mongols pushed further into Europe, moving through Galicia and Podolia, then advancing toward Eastern Europe. One part of their army marched northwest, attacking Poland and moving through Bohemia and Moravia. Another force turned south, invading Transylvania, Moldavia, and Wallachia. Hungary became a key target due to its vast grasslands, which the Mongols saw as an ideal base for their cavalry as they prepared to push further into Western Europe. And now let's delve into the Mongol invasion of Poland and Hungary, where the Mongols continued their ruthless expansion across Europe. As the Mongols advanced into Poland, they torched towns across the region, leaving a path of destruction in their wake. The city of Krakow fell in 1241, easily captured after its prince, Boleslav the Chaste, abandoned it. Following their usual brutal tactics, the Mongols slaughtered the remaining inhabitants and looted the city. A chilling reminder of this event remains to this day. A trumpeter who sounded the alarm at the Mongols' arrival was shot in the throat by an arrow, and this moment is still reenacted in Krakow, minus the arrow, of course. After Krakow, the Mongols set their sights on Breslau, now Wrocław. But fear had already spread among the city's inhabitants. They decided to burn their own city to the ground and retreat to the castle citadel, hoping the fortress would offer some protection. Just when it seemed like the Mongols would storm the citadel, word reached their commanders that a large Polish army was assembling under Duke Henry the Pious of Silesia. Seizing the opportunity, the Mongols redirected their forces and rode out to meet this new threat. On April 9, 1241, near Wallstatt, close to Legnica, the Mongol army clashed with a force composed of Poles, Germans, Teutonic Knights, and other heavy cavalry units. The Mongols, as usual, employed their classic tactic of a false retreat, drawing the European forces into a trap. With the added confusion of smoke from burning reeds, the Mongols launched a devastating attack. The battle ended in complete annihilation for the European forces, with Duke Henry killed, his head gruesomely displayed on a spike as a grim trophy of war. The Battle of Liegnitz marked the furthest west the Mongols reached in their invasion of Europe, and the victors reportedly filled 9 sacks with the ears of their fallen enemies, a macabre symbol of their victory. Meanwhile, Hungary was facing its own Mongol invasion. In a well-coordinated, multi-pronged attack, Mongol armies pushed through Moravia and around the Carpathian Mountains to strike Hungary from several directions. The westernmost Mongol forces penetrated deep into Moldavia and Wallachia before turning north to attack Hungary from the south. King Bela IV of Hungary, who commanded one of the most formidable armies in Europe, mobilized to confront the Mongol threat. But Bela's troubles were compounded by internal strife. Many of his barons were discontented, and their loyalty was questionable. Additionally, the Polovchins, a nomadic group fleeing the Mongols, had crossed into Hungarian territory and were causing havoc. Despite these challenges, Bela met the Mongol forces at the Battle of Mohi on April 10 to 11, 240, near the Sile River. The Mongol commander, Subutai, orchestrated a masterful attack, sending his forces across a pontoon bridge and through a swamp to flank the Hungarian army, while Mongol catapults bombarded them from across the river. The Hungarian army was utterly defeated, and King Bela fled to the safety of Pressburg, now modern-day Bratislava, and eventually to Croatia. The Mongols continued their march, converging at the Danube River in early April. In 1241, both Buda and Pest were sacked and looted, with Pest falling on Christmas Day. The Mongols then turned their attention to Gran, the largest and wealthiest city in the region. On Christmas Day, they began a siege using 30 catapults. Gran soon fell to the relentless Mongol assault. From there, the invaders moved along the Danube, pushing westward to Wiener Neustadt. Here, an army led by Duke Frederick II of Austria finally gave the Mongols a moment's pause, forcing them to reconsider their advance. Meanwhile, a separate Mongol force chased King Bela into Croatia, sacking Zagreb as they went, before continuing through Bosnia and Albania. Eventually, this force headed towards the Caspian Sea and Sarai, which would become the capital of the Golden Horde. The northern Mongol forces also retreated, but this withdrawal was not due to a military defeat. Instead, the news had finally reached them that Genghis Khan had died on December 11, 1241. The Mongol leaders needed to return to Mongolia for the Kurultai, a traditional council meeting where a new Khan would be chosen. There may have been other reasons for the Mongols' withdrawal in 1242. Communication lines were stretched thin, and the grasslands of Hungary, which they had hoped would sustain their large cavalry force, were proving inadequate. Moreover, with Genghis gone, internal rivalries among the Mongol commanders emerged, making it difficult for any one leader to assert control so far from home. And while Europe offered rich plunder, the Mongols' greatest prize still lay to the east, the Song dynasty in China, which would soon face the might of Kublai Khan, Genghis' successor. And now let's dive into what made the Mongols so remarkably successful in their conquests across Europe and beyond. One of the Mongol army's greatest advantages was their complete unpredictability. To the Russians and Europeans, the Mongols were almost like ghosts. No one really knew where they came from or what they were capable of. Even after the Battle of Khalkha, the Western world was still in the dark about who these invaders were. A Novgorodian chronicler famously remarked, "They turned back from the river Dnieper, and we know not whence they came and whither they went." A decade and a half later, little had changed. The Mongols remained a mystery, and that mystery worked in their favor. The Mongol warriors themselves were incredibly tough, seasoned soldiers with a mastery of archery using their powerful composite bows. They could ride for days on end, surviving on minimal food and water. Their horses, while small and stocky, were perfectly suited for the harsh conditions, capable of withstanding both extreme cold and heat. Each Mongol rider typically had a string of up to 16 spare horses, allowing them to cover vast distances quickly. This mobility was unmatched and gave the Mongols an enormous tactical advantage. Their army was also highly organized. The Mongols operated on strict schedules, with different divisions splitting up to engage the enemy in various locations, only to reunite at a predetermined point. If you were to look at a map of a Mongol campaign, it would resemble a tangled mess of lines, with armies moving in all directions like a chaotic plate of spaghetti. But there was nothing chaotic about it. Their movements were carefully coordinated, making it nearly impossible for their enemies to predict where they would strike next. Flexibility was another key to their success. The Mongols were quick to adopt and adapt enemy tactics and technologies. They brought incredible mobility to the battlefield, but they were also quick learners in other forms of warfare, including siege tactics and the use of gunpowder missiles and catapults. These were far from the traditional methods of nomadic warriors, but the Mongols mastered them all the same. Even the formidable European knights, who were considered elite troops, posed little challenge to the Mongols. The knights, with their heavy armor and powerful horses, couldn't get close enough to the nimble Mongol cavalry, who simply refused to stand still long enough for a direct confrontation. But the Mongols didn't just rely on brute force. They were masters of psychological warfare, using fear as a powerful weapon. Genghis Khan had perfected the art of terror, slaughtering entire populations of captured cities, men, women, and children alike. The message was clear: resist, and face total annihilation. This tactic continued under Genghis Khan. The Mongols would often release a few prisoners who had witnessed their atrocities, ensuring the next city got the message loud and clear. Cities that resisted were met with even greater brutality, sometimes using prisoners as human shields or dressing them as Mongol soldiers to draw enemy fire. Another aspect of their success was their ability to exploit internal divisions among their enemies. The Mongols knew how to stir up old rivalries and weaken alliances, often gathering valuable intelligence through spies and merchants. And then there was their relentless drive for plunder. The Mongol war machine was fueled by the promise of loot, and this motivation kept their soldiers focused and determined. At the helm of this formidable force was Subutai Badger, one of the greatest military commanders in history. Subutai had already proven himself in campaigns under Genghis Khan in East Asia, and he was the mastermind behind the Mongol invasion of Western Asia and Eastern Europe. Though the figurehead of the campaign was Batu, Genghis Khan's nephew, it was Subutai who commanded the troops. Despite his legendary status, Subutai was said to be too large to ride a single pony and often traveled in a carriage. But from there, he directed his troops with remarkable skill, with his leadership at the Battle of Mohi being particularly crucial. Now, although the Mongols eventually withdrew from Europe in 1242, their invasion left a lasting impact. The immediate consequences were devastating: death, destruction, and the forced displacement of countless people. While Europe's power structures largely remained intact, Russia and vast parts of Western Asia were forever changed, remaining under what became known as the Tartar yoke for more than a century. Despite the fearsome reputation the Mongols earned, not all of their conquests resulted in complete devastation. In some regions like Russia, local rulers were still able to maintain a degree of autonomy. Alexander Nevsky, the Prince of Vladimir, is a prime example. Despite the Mongol invasion, he successfully defended his lands against Swedish and German knights. The legacy of the Mongol invasion didn't end with their military campaigns. The Mongols connected east and west like never before, facilitating the exchange of ideas and technologies. Europe benefited immensely from this contact, gaining knowledge of gunpowder, paper, printing, and the compass, innovations that would shape the future of the continent. Ambassadors, papal emissaries, missionaries, and travelers like Marco Polo ventured into the East and returned with stories and ideas that would change the way Europeans viewed the world. However, not all the consequences were positive. The increased contact also brought about the spread of the Black Death, a devastating plague that originated in China and made its way to Europe, causing unimaginable suffering and far surpassing the death toll inflicted by the Mongols themselves.